Let me tell you the story. This is where we came from. We came from a torn continent, destroyed by 2 world wars, impoverished, afloat, disoriented. But the European ideal started as a way to bring peace and stability to this continent, trying for the first time in our history to create a union of different people and culture on equal terms, a project of bringing people together, regardless of their race, gender, religion, culture. And we arrived to a point where the European Union created prosperity. Economic growth was seen as a model for other parts of the world, based on values such as democracy, tolerance, justice, human rights. Things seemed to be going in the right direction. So what went wrong?
Economic crisis, high unemployment, persistent low growth. The resurgence of populism, radicalization of society as a whole, the rise of terrorist groups who want to cause death and destruction. The future ahead seems dark sometimes, when we just focus on this news, on what pulls us apart, not what brings us together. Is this the future we want? Is this the future we see for ourselves and our children? Shouldn't we try to find a different way, tell a different story to the rest of the world? Shouldn't we tell ourselves a different story, a brighter one? A story of hope, of possibilities, of joy and happiness.
This is the story of a journey. This is the story of a new path. This is a story of a path towards a better Europe. A story of lives, like the ones of you and me, who want simple things, like peace, a job, a community who cares, an education for our children, a place where our taxes contribute to building a better society, and for a union of equality, justice, fairness.
This is why we need to debate, discuss,
find new solutions.
together.
Juntos.
Společně.
Insieme.
Carto.
Razem. Skupaj.
Together.
Zusammen.
Sam.
Juntos.
Zajedno.
Juntos.
Ensemble.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. That is exactly what we are going to do. We're going to discuss this evening, and we're going to do this together. So I would like to welcome you here in Antwerp for the 10th edition of the Together event, which started about a year ago. It's a tour around Europe just to get into interaction with European citizens. It's an event organized by the Socialists and Democrats group from the EU Parliament. We're going to talk in English. All of us are we're going to talk in English. So if you need translation, you just switch to channel number 1 for Flemish or Dutch, and to number 2 if you want to have French translation. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have to say it's very nice to have you here, and I mean this literally. It's very nice to have you here physically, because there are always people watching this debate from anywhere in Europe through live streaming, which is broadcasted on Facebook, on the SND website, and the SND YouTube channel. So I would like to welcome our viewers from wherever they are watching. I would like to welcome them as well. It would be nice actually to know where they are based. So you can use the social media channels if you want to let us know where you are watching from. You can send us a message on Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, and of course Twitter. Because as you can see on the screen, we've got different screens. It's our Twitter wall, which we're going to use to project your interaction with us. You can ask your questions from whether you are based in Ireland or Spain or Italy, just ask your questions, send us your remarks. The hashtag is Europe Together. So that's very important. So it's not going to be a discussion between experts. We have invited some experts, but it's important to have some interaction from the people who are here physically in the Horta here in Antwerp, but also the people who are watching the live streaming. Okay, so the topic that we're going to discuss today is how cities can lead Europe towards a sustainable future. And of course, we all know what the challenges are. We all know what is at stake. And I think we know more or less how to get to a low-carbon economy. But there is some discussion exactly what ways we have to go. And that's something that we're going to talk about this evening. So absolutely your input is important. Who is taking the lead? That's something else we have to discuss. Is it something that we have to count on the United Nations? We have to count on the European Union? Is it something that just nation states should do, or just the citizens? Or do we have to count on the input and the cities? Do we have to put our hopes on their role that they can play in the transition to a different society? So these are all very interesting topics. You've all received a map with the two debates that we're going to have this evening, but because one of our keynote speakers hasn't arrived yet, he's stuck in a traffic jam. This is Belgium. So we have swapped the two topics. So we're going to start with the panel discussion on ports as vectors for an efficient and ambitious European green economy. And it's Professor Jan Rotmans who will give a keynote speech to launch already a few ideas before we will dwell on the subject with the other panel members. And then we continue with what was planned to be the first discussion on ways to increase the involvement of cities in the decision-making process in the EU. And it's Erik Corijn who will be our keynote speaker for the second discussion. But first, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to leave the floor to the Vice President of the SND Group. Kathleen van Bremt is an excellent Belgian politician who held office as State Secretary in the federal government and Minister in the Flemish government. And being from Antwerp, of course, she keeps an eye on what is happening at city level as a member of the City Council of Antwerp. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kathleen van Bremt.
Right. Difficult in a round. But let me start. Is that functioning well? Yeah. Let me start by first of all welcome all of you here in my city, the city of Antwerp. This is the Together event of my dear SND group. We organize that regularly. Just last week we had a meeting in Gothenburg on the social pillar, and today we are discussing the very important role of cities that they can and should play in the transition towards a sustainable economy. And let me start by saying this a little bit provocative. Cities are not always the city that you are born in, or not by definition where you are born in. They're places you go to, you come to. And in that sense, they are crossroads today, as they always were, of people coming there to trade, to exchange views, to study, to be there. And in that sense, people who used to be strangers, they all of a sudden become citizens of that cities because they share the same identities and they share the same interest. And what we see today is that some global challenges are also very much urban challenges. And let me take two very important and very dear to us, very important challenges: migration on the one hand and climate change on the other. Migration and migrants, they do what they did for centuries. They went, they were looking for a better future. Sometimes they are fleeing because of war, because of uncertainty, economic circumstances, but more and more people are also fleeing because of climate change is happening. And we have to take that into account. And they flee very often to cities. At the same time, cities are having a huge effect on that climate change. Although they only present 2%, they only have 2% of the surface of our planet, they are responsible for 78% of the world's energy and 60% of all the carbon dioxides that are emitted. And what we see today is that these challenges, migration, but also the challenge of climate, that they're on the one hand tackled globally. Think about the United Nations, or at the level of the EU, very important. And on the other hand, by states. And that is becoming a problem. And I want to give I want to cite Benjamin Barber, the late Benjamin Barber. Sorry. The late Benjamin Barber, I really like the professor. He has been in Antwerp in the Bourla, was a lot of people listening to him. And I want to cite him and say, as the world has become more global and interdependent, sovereign nations and their international networks have grown less effective and sometimes even dysfunctional. And that was the reason why Benjamin Barber promoted the whole idea of the Parliament of Mayors. And he also wrote a book, What If Mayors Ruled the World? And that's one of the issues that we will be talking tonight. And it would have been the first panel, but it's now the second panel because Erik Orijn is in traffic jam. But I have to say also, our very good mayor of Ghent, coming from Ghent by car is not a very good idea. Also, Daniel Termont is in the traffic jam. But we'll hope they get there for the second panel. And, dear colleagues, Antwerp is not just a city. Antwerp has been, still is, and I'm quite sure always will be, a city with one of the most important harbors of Europe. I'm looking to the mayor of Rotterdam now. And of course, ports are a very important engine of economic growth, of job creation, but they also have a reverse side to that, and that is, of course, they are responsible for a lot of our ecological and social challenges that we are facing. And ports are the place where carbon-intensive industries are very much concentrated, like in Antwerp, with a very huge concentration of chemical industries, for instance. And that means that they present today an important, they have an important impact. Today, Rotterdam, who is that other very beautiful city with an also important harbor, I have to say. They are responsible for 17% of the Dutch global carbon print. And Antwerp is responsible for 14% of the global carbon print. So that is extremely important. So if we succeed in making that very densely populated city area and that very energy-intensive port cities, if we can make them carbon neutral, then we will succeed also elsewhere. And to talk about Sinatra, if you can make it there, you will and can make it anywhere. So if we can solve the problems in our cities and our harbors, we can solve the problems globally. And that will be the subject of the first panel of tonight with Professor Jan Rotmans. Very happy to have you, Professor. I'm not sort of woman that is looking up to many people, especially not men, but I have to say, looking up to you, Professor Rotmans, you are a very important professor and a world authority in transition management. So I'm very happy that we have so very interesting speakers, and I hope you will have a very interesting evening. And before I give the floor back to our moderator, Francesca Van Thiele, I want to say that Francesca is not just a well-known woman in Flanders. We say bekende Vlaming. No, she's much more than that. Francesca is... she's one of the driving forces behind the Klimaatzaak, the climate case, as there is one in the Netherlands as well, where they unite a lot of very concerned people, and they have a court case against the Belgian government, with an S. We have many governments in Belgium. Because, and I think they're right, I have to say unfortunately, because they don't take the suitable action to combat climate change. I hope that you all will have an inspiring evening, and I hope to see you back afterwards for a drink and a little bite. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathleen van Bremt. And thank you for mentioning the climate case, which we indeed started about 2.5 years already. We started with 11 people, indeed, a lawsuit against 4 governments, 3 regional and 1 federal government, who are responsible in our very tiny, small country with 11 million people. We've got 4 ministers responsible for climate policy, which makes it a bit difficult to get some real output and some very good agreements on what to do. So we started off with 11 people, and by now we are about 31,000 plaintiffs. So it's going to be, when we start, because we haven't started yet, the process hasn't started yet, it's going to be a very, very big lawsuit that's going to happen here in Belgium. So hopefully in the rest of Europe they will follow this lawsuit as they did in Holland, because it's not our idea. We didn't come up with the idea with doing a lawsuit. It's based on what Urgenda did, and Jan Rotmans, our first keynote speaker this evening, is one of the 2 founders with Marianne Minnesma of Urgenda. They started the first lawsuit in the world, I think, against a government, and they won in June 2015. So that was really worldwide big news. So I come up with you, our first keynote speaker. It's Professor Jan Rotmans. He will talk about ports and the role they can play in the transition to a climate-neutral, circular economy. And Professor Rotmans is professor at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam. Mr. Rotmans, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in the new era of the new economy and new society. That's my profession, transitions. I started about 25 years ago with investigating transitions. In that period, almost nobody saw the importance and the urgency of transitions. It's now becoming very fashionable. So I always start with this one, if the technique is working. We do not live in an era of change, but in a change of era. I hope that you realize that the changes that we see around us are profound, are transformative in many areas, in many fields, in our society, in our economy. And you are the lucky ones. You are part of a revolution. There are not too many generations that might say that. But it's an evolutionary revolution. It will take decades, and perhaps it's best comparable with the second half of the 19th century. In Antwerp, but also in Rotterdam, we started digging the large harbors right in the center of the cities. And that was quite controversial. There were not many people supporting that, because most people said, it's too costly, it's too risky. So remember my first message to you. In eras of transformative change, you need to take bold, controversial decisions. Because after all, it appeared to be a huge success. And with hindsight, people said, yeah, that was the right decision and right direction. Because the population of Rotterdam exploded, like in Antwerp. But after all, with hindsight, it's easy. We were inspired 3 years ago in Rotterdam by Jeremy Rifkin and his ideas about the next society and next economy, saying that we need to manage power and move our economy in a completely different way. So what we are doing now with a group of experts, it's actually quite a small group of people from the private and public sector. We have delivered a kind of a roadmap. Don't think that it's a blueprint, far from that, it's more a quest. But we asked ourselves, what is the right direction and what is the future vision where we are heading for? If you don't have a vision as a city or region, you are muddling through. Action without vision is meaningless. But it also holds for vision without action. So we try to interrelate the vision and the strategy and the action in each and every way. So we have delivered a kind of an action perspective, and based on that, a regional investment strategy. And for us, it's more or less a kind of a compass to the new economy. And that's necessary, ladies and gentlemen, because Rotterdam is the champion of the old economy. And I might say that Antwerp is also the champion of the old economy, because it's still largely driven by the main ports and the green port, and everything in our harbors is carbon-driven. Rotterdam is among the most carbon-intensive cities of the whole world, like in Antwerp. And 15 years ago, I delivered a book that was Visions on the Future of Europe. And the main message of that book was the future of Europe will be determined by the regions. Not by the nation states, but by the regions. So cities are organizing themselves in regions throughout Europe. You see that all over Europe. And that's what we are doing also in Rotterdam. So we have developed a kind of a roadmap for the region Rotterdam-The Hague. Because seen from China, Rotterdam is not even a city. It's more a village. The same holds for Antwerp. So we need to organize ourselves at the higher scale level of about 50 by 100 kilometers. So what we did, together with hundreds of stakeholders, was organizing a quest. So what is the road to the future economy and future society? We don't know where we will be ending, but at least we have now a kind of a compass. And it's difficult because the transition goes in incremental and radical steps, and there are various projects that we are delivering. I'm going to talk about it later on. But basically we asked ourselves 4 questions. Where do we earn our money with in 20 years from now? What does that require in terms of investment? What does it yield in terms of employment, jobs? And what kind of skills and competences are needed to make this happen? And I'm going to address these questions very briefly. Our ultimate challenge is enormous. We have 3 pillars of the old economy that we are transforming in a way that they will become the champions of the new economy. The industry and the port, the green port, let's say all the horticulture that we have, and the built environment. The vision that we delivered is that in 30 years from now, we will be zero carbon, zero waste, circular, digitally connected. That's what I call the hardware of the new economy. And then the software, we want to become more entrepreneurial, more smart, and inclusive. And the latter is very important, because in the 19th century, we saw an exclusive society unfolding. And after all, we repaired that, but that was a huge effort. And the same holds now. There is a threat that the new economy will lead to a kind of a shift between the middle and lower class and the higher class. And we need to do everything to avoid that. So you see here, this is huge. A harbor, a port that is in 30 years from now free of carbon and waste, it's hard to imagine that. This is the biggest challenge in 150 years. And the same holds for Antwerp. How to get there? Well, the new economy, ladies and gentlemen, does not follow the lines of the sectors, the traditional silos. We have many silos in Belgium and the Netherlands, but they do not hold any longer. So the new economy is based on what we call transition pathways. And we have seen 5 of them. First is about the smart digital delta that we are working on. The second is about smart energy delta. The third one is about the circular economy. 3 form the hardware of the new economy. And then you see the lower 2, becoming more entrepreneurial and building an inclusive society, including the lower class and the middle class. And these cut across all the silos of the old economy. That's fascinating. So what we have been trying to do is, based on the vision, develop a strategy by working out elaboratively the 5 transition pathways and link to that 20 different projects. I will show you a part of them, 10 different business cases. And in doing that, we took an integrated approach. And I was partly responsible for that. And that means that you need to think thoroughly about the relationships between the vision, the strategy, and the action all the time. So we are trying to interlink the different pathways and between the pathways to align the different projects. We have selected 20 of these projects based on the impact on society they have, how many jobs do they create, the impact of people, how can we become even more smart, whether they are a breakthrough project or doing more of the same, because you can do things more efficiently, but what really matters for the new economy is that you do things in an entirely different way. These are the projects that we selected. Half of them are based on the software, so people-related, investing in people, and half of them are about investing in the new infrastructure. I cannot go into detail. It's about making houses, let's say, free of gas. That's huge. That's an enormous challenge. But also making these houses smart. It's about investing in a new infrastructure for the port and the built environment. But it's also about, let's say, collecting people and with them investing in new relationships to make them more agile and resilient for the new economy. I'll present you 2 examples. This is the Dutch wind wheel that's supposed to be delivered in 3-4 years from now. It's huge. It's 175 meters high. And it is a kind of a windmill. It generates a lot of sustainable energy, but it's also a kind of an exposition of all the innovative elements that belong to the new economy. And we have one well-known campus, and that is that used to be an old building, let's say, of the old economy. But there are hundreds of students now working actively on the new economy. So they get education there, they are trained practically in the new economy, and also they work with companies, and the companies are related there. So it is a matter of doing things simultaneously, learning, becoming entrepreneurial, and investing in the companies and in the people there. We are going to plan 5 of these campuses the next 10 years in order to relate the old and the new economy. I've here figured out the project score of the next economy. So there are projects that are optimizing what we are doing, that's necessary, but there are also projects that are doing things radically different. You see that in the right upper scheme. That's very important. So if I look at what is going on now, a majority of the projects is ready to start, but is optimizing what we have been doing. But the fascinating projects are at the upper right part, that is doing things in an entirely different way. That is what we need to build up the next economy. About the cost, it won't be easy. It's a difficult road. It is challenging. There are people claiming that energy in the future will be cheap or will be, let's say, that you don't even have to pay money for it. That's nonsense. Look at these figures. We need to invest in our region about 50 billion euro for the next 25 years. So that is about 5-6 billion per year. Part goes to the new infrastructure, the hardware, and part goes to the software. So we need to invest in people, we need to invest in their education, but we also need to build up completely a new infrastructure, bottom up. Let's say, house for house, neighborhood for neighborhood. Who is going to pay that? You and I, the companies and the government, the regional and the national government. Employment, what does it yield? About 100,000 jobs. Let's say with an order of magnitude uncertainty, but about this case, 100,000 jobs in the short term, the next 10 years, 200,000 jobs in the longer term. That's huge. These are all the people working in the new, clean, digital, circular economy. That is excluding, by the way, excluding the jobs that will be lost in the old economy. And I will round off with some proud that we are working as the first region in Europe on a regional investment platform that is a kind of a vehicle to accelerate the new economy. Because most of these projects, they need some support. They are not business ripe. The market is not ripe yet for many parts of the new economy, so you need to support them temporarily. And we do that together with the European Investment Bank and with other European funds to build a kind of a financial base for the projects of the new economy. And in spring next year, we hope to deliver that as the first region in Europe. And we have a kind of a portal to invite people to participate from bottom up. So everyone who has, let's say, a directed project that fits well within our scope is, let's say, asked to deliver that. Because it shouldn't be only a top-down process, but a real bottom-up process, inviting as many people as possible. So the portal will be launched next week when Mr. Šefčovič is visiting us from the EU. And anyone can do that on his or her own. So if you have an idea or a project, you can go through 5 steps and see to what extent you have a chance to become part of our process. This is the ultimate challenge for us. I think we need to share this knowledge and insight with many people in Europe. Sharing knowledge is a part of the new economy. We need to accelerate the new economy. We have only 20 years, ladies and gentlemen, to do this. I was the first person in the Netherlands to get his PhD on climate change. That was 27 years ago, in 1990. I did not get my cum laude because my commission said, perhaps in 30 years from now, it might appear that you have done wonderful research into a non-existing problem. And that was the first bottle of whiskey that I won with a bet after 27 years ago. We know now much more about climate change. The urgency is increasing year by year. 20 years we have to do something. That is huge. I hope that you are with me and with each other tonight to work on this. Everyone with focused ideas is able to participate. If you don't believe in it, then I say everybody thought that it was impossible. Till somebody stepped by who didn't know that. And that was me tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Rotmans, I would like to invite you to take a seat. Thank you for your very interesting introduction speech, and I would like to invite the 2 other panel members on stage. Eva Perez Garcia, Director of Transport Economics, Fundación Valencia Port. It's a research center in Valencia, and Mr. Ahmed Aboutaleb, the Mayor of Rotterdam since 2009. Please welcome. And I would like to mention before we start, and I would like to get some response from our 2 panel members, extra panel members, on the speech, the keynote speech of Mr. Rotmans. But before we start, I would like to mention again that people who are watching the live streaming on Facebook, on the YouTube channel, or the the YouTube channel and the website, of course, of S&D. They can send a tweet and they will be projected on one of the screens and we will ask your questions. So questions, remarks, everything you can send to us, what you just heard, or questions you want to ask to any of the three panel members. They're all very welcome. And the hashtag that we use is Europe Together. All right, we will start with you, Mrs. Garcia. What is I think you want to mention a few things after the keynote speech of Mr. Rotmans.
Good evening, everyone, distinguished co-panelists, distinguished audience. It is a pleasure and an honor for me to have been invited to this event. I'd like to talk briefly about the challenges that...
A little bit like this. It's going to be much better. Thank you.
That ports face in this transition period. We share the same vision that Professor Rotman has been talking about. We also believe that the ultimate goal needs to be a zero-carbon city, and I live in a port city, in the port city of Valencia. We also need to have zero waste and be obviously digitally connected and promote an inclusive society. So, well, as I've said, I come from Valencia. It's the third largest city in Spain, and it's the largest port in the Mediterranean. It's still very small in comparison to the 4 giants in Northern Europe, but it's still a large port. And if we consider that we contribute 2.5% to the Valencian region economy, and we employ 37,000 people, we could say that it's actually the entire sector. It's the largest corporation in the Valencian region. So ports, as we all know, are instrumental are instrumental in channeling and facilitating trade, international trade. But we also have an obligation, and we need to reduce our environmental impact, because as you've said, it's huge. We are major contributors to our economy, but we are also major polluters. So we also have an environmental plan and policy, and we studied years ago the main sources of contribution to this negative environmental impact. We realized that they come from ship emissions on the one side, obviously, but also from our 3 major container terminals. In Valencia, we do not have a large industrial area behind the port, so the main activities are the terminal themselves. So we studied which equipment were contributing the most to this environmental impact. We realized that they came from the container tractors, the tracks in the container terminals, and from RTGs, which is the type of crane that is the most frequently used one in container terminals all over the world. 95% of the emissions come from those 2 types of equipment. And we sat down with major manufacturers all over Europe to try and engage them into innovating to use alternatives or electricity and therefore become much cleaner. And I'd like to mention 3 examples of things we've done. Working together with Konecranes, we've studied the consumption pattern of our cranes in the port, and we've realized that 40% of the fleet of RTGs, of this typical yard crane, are overpowered. So they are too big an engine for the kind of work that they are doing. So reducing the engine size, we've reduced consumption by 45%. We've done that together with Konecranes, a leading Finnish company. We've also worked with Kalmar to produce the first liquefied natural gas fueled yard crane, and also working together with Paseco, we've generated an energy recovery system, a generator that also recovers the energy from the movement to lower the container that the crane does. Those are 3 examples. We are starting to see the results now. MSC Container Terminal has invested already to electrify 20 of their cranes. And this is only the first phase. They are going to do the entire terminal. This is going to mean 16,000 tons of CO2 that will not be emitted every year to the atmosphere. So it's a beginning. There are 11 automated or semi-automated terminals in Europe at the moment, and they are fully electrified. Most of them are in Antwerp, Rotterdam, Hamburg. But we need to not forget that 400 of other terminals use diesel. So it's very important in this transition period to start mitigating the effects of our activity in the port. So we've done a bit, but much more remains to be done. We need to foster modal shift. That is a problem in Southern Europe, particularly in Spain. 93% of exports and imports come to and leave the port by track. And that is a figure that is unacceptable. Mm-hmm. So we need to invest in railways, we need to invest in short sea shipping, we need to invest in green energy. If other terminals decided to follow the example of MSC, the Port of Valencia doesn't have the capacity to give enough electricity to the 3 terminals. So we need an electrical substation, we need wind farms, we need new investments in green energy. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to offer onshore power supply to vessels, for instance. If they want to switch to the electricity in the port, we cannot. We do not have enough electrical capacity. We also need to give incentives to the best in class, to ship owners, to cargo owners, to the ones that are adopting the best environmental practices. And for all of this, innovation is key. Innovation is essential for ports to achieve zero emission goals. We know that fuel cells are coming. Biogas projects could be generating energy with residues coming from cruise ships, for instance. But we could do much more. For instance, recycling vessels. Did you know that only 22 of the 700 vessels that were dismantled last year? Yeah, I'm about to finish.
We would like to have a discussion and interaction with the audience, so can we...
So only 22 were recycled in Europe. The rest end up in the beach in Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. And most of those vessels belong to European interest.
Okay.
So we should be able to do something about that, right?
Let's leave it with that. We've heard some very good practices being done in the port of Valencia. Mr. Abu Taleb, in Rotterdam, do you recognize what in the port of Valencia has been learned? Do you apply this in Rotterdam as well?
Good evening. Well, the story Professor Rotmans told was more or less started somewhere in the City Hall during one dinner. It was the moment that I decided to invite Mr. Jamie Rifkin to come to Rotterdam. And we invited a couple of people for dinner, a small dinner, with some companies, with some thinkers, and it's there it started. It's really a kind of a revolutionary thinking. And I still remember a very important man in the gas and oil world who told me once the transition from the stone period to the steam was not because there was a lack of stones. Uh-huh. The civilization needed something different, needed a revolution.
Yeah.
So we went from stones to steam. Still there is a lot of stones in the world. When I was a reporter in the 80s, I traveled through Jordan to go to the first Gulf War region in the 90s. If you travel through Jordan, you will see tremendous amount of stones, enough for the entire world, but we leave them. And then there was another revolution. We went from steam to electricity and steel. And that period was again shorter than the first one. So imagine how that happens. I have a wonderful painting in my room showing how the port was operating with steam vessels. It's a fascinating historic painting. And then we went to the period that we now know. And
do you think this transition period will be shorter as well?
Well, let me give you an example. I'm an engineer in electronics, so I know everything about telephones and things like this. We have been operating with analog telephones for more than 100 years, isn't it? More than 100 years was a suitable, good thing. And nowadays, this apparatus has a life cycle of 2 years, and it's over 2 years. The new technology to enter the market is already available in Silicon Valley. They don't put it on the market just not to have a big doses at the same time. So that is really short. You are still talking about really the port as it is now, having places where containers are coming in, and we load and offload containers. My opinion is, for a big portion, that will be over. The port of Rotterdam will change, in my opinion, not in the biggest port of the world, but in the smartest, greenest location for green production in the world. Do you imagine what does it mean now for all this cheap stuff coming from China? It's all made in China, plastics and metal stuff, because it's cheap. Labor market is cheap. But nowadays, it's not necessary anymore to produce this stuff there. The same machine, the same robot, the same 3D print machine is installed in Rotterdam. We print all this stuff in Rotterdam. What does that mean for logistics and the ships coming in and out? What does that mean for the working people in the port dealing with containers and cranes? That is going to disappear. Read my lips. That's going to be disappear. Next week, the first propeller ever 3D printed will be fixed under a vessel in Rotterdam, a vessel that is one of the smartest in the world, built by Diamond Shipyard in Rotterdam. 3D printed propeller, the first one in the world. This is a very small beginning, but it will take the economic space in the world within a couple of years. We're not only nowadays able to print plastics, we print metal. So what does that mean? Thinking about transition, I'm a city planner. What does that mean for my vocational training? Will continue to educate people in stuff that will disappear within 10 years? Shall we change our curricula? What does that mean for our institutions? What does that mean for the way we plan, for our communications? It's a fascinating new period. That's why I don't need the United Nations. We don't need a EU, because those institutions are wonderful. One says we should give him again a cum laude 27 years later for the study he started. It's really a fascinating world. It's more fascinating for local governments than for what else.
But if you say that industry is coming back to Europe, for example, and to the ports, do you think that the shipping industry will diminish the importance, that it will be
partly will disappear? There will still be capacity to move raw materials like iron ore or partly the coming 30 years gas and oil, but that will be diminished. So what you see in ports, the working opportunities will do this, labor market. And the question that is posed by Professor Rothmans is the degree to which we are unable to build up new economy and new jobs, and where the cross-section is between the both lines. That is a transition period. And I think, but I'm just a city leader, that transition period maybe could be shorter than 30 years mentioned by Professor Rothmans.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. There are a few people, I think, with a microphone. So is anyone in the room here in Horta wants to ask a question? Because we definitely would like to have some interaction with you, and of course with the people who are watching on live streaming the debate. The hashtag on Twitter is Europe Together. Anyone wants to ask a question? Well, I'll use this one. We've got a spare one here. Here you are. Sorry. Yeah.
Thanks. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask a question because I will be a speaker later. But I think it's very fascinating because this is a huge exercise you're doing as cities, and I admire all of those who have the courage to do that, especially when I look at Rotterdam because it's a huge port. And what is interesting to me is to listen a bit, to hear a bit more about the way, how do you finance all this investment? We've heard about this is a huge money, and Mayor, you said that you hope it will not be taking you 30 years, but all of this needs money. So how is your mix of investment and financial instruments in that?
I will tell you a bit strange story. There was a period that we have been forming a new government with 4 parties. My party was not involved in that. So they may consider me in The Hague, where the parliament is, as a member of the opposition, which I'm not. But I was the one to take the telephone and call the prime minister and the other leaders and told them, you are negotiating, I have a story to tell you, and I want to come on your table, and I need at least 1 hour to tell you my story. And I brought my colleagues from the other 3 major cities with me to that table. It turns to be 1 hour and 40 minutes. And that was this agenda, the transition agenda. 50 billion euros is not a big money concerning a transition period of 20, 30 years. The national GDP in the Netherlands is 750 billion euros. We spend more than 100 billion euros on healthcare, on one theme a year. So when we are talking about that transition, we, the cities, can help the Netherlands government to survive the coach holding on our agenda. We can help them to save more than 2 million tons of CO2 emissions in the port a year. So we can help each other. We have a common agenda. So talking about our relation with Europe, I think we should have a similar agenda with the EU, with the cities, to be partners in dealing with this. We have on all budgets. The port is making profit. Partly, the port can finance a lot of things. If we do that together with the environmental policy of the national government, to bridge 20 years' time, 50 billion euros is not a big money. That is the equal money that's needed to protect the city of Jakarta against flooding.
May I add to that? Just a few sentences. I think the biggest barrier for this transition is not lack of money, but the lack of imagination. The biggest barrier is between our ears. In the 19th century, the people could not imagine that all those ships coming from all over the world would come to Rotterdam and Antwerp. And we now cannot imagine that our harbors will really transform. Because what is the added value of a harbor these days? Imagine that. What is the added value that they produce? They only import materials and resources and export them. What we are going to see is that there is a renaissance of the manufacturing industry, like the mayor sketched. So we are going to produce things in the harbor areas. And people cannot even imagine that this will happen, but it is already taking place now.
Next week, there will be a big signing ceremony, so I'm giving you some news, between a couple of parties in the Netherlands to build thousands of windmills in the North Sea to deliver electricity to northwestern Europe. And we deal already that the cable that is coming to Europe is going to enter Europe in Rotterdam itself. And the Port Authority already built an island to make the facilities for the companies to bring all this infrastructure to the sea and come back. That's working opportunities for a huge number of people for a long period. So we kill jobs indeed in the carbon period, but we create new jobs. And so our responsibility as politicians will be speeding up that process. Speeding up that process, because otherwise we kill more jobs than we create in the short term. And that is, for the acceptance of the energy transition, a very important component. In my port, we have more than 150,000 daily jobs. So we cannot wait until things are happening spontaneously. When I was defending the idea of hiring this team in Rotterdam for 700,000 euros, the criticism from my city council was, well, that is a lot of money. What I told them, how much money we spent on paying social benefits every year in Rotterdam, it's hundreds of millions of euros. So if we can save by introducing this, just for the coming years, 1,000 jobs, we have benefits. It's really important to do the math differently and take the glasses of the former age off.
One more remark on the investments. I saw a tweet passing by asking, should it be public funding or private funding?
Mixed.
Mixed, yeah.
The reality is things are complex. I was working as a young boy for the Social Economic Council with a big authority. Unfortunately, he's not among us anymore. That was when Jongerius still was in the trade union, representing the union in the Social Economic Council. The chairman who told me those years, if things are complex, there are only complex solutions.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question here in the room. Maybe it's better to introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Sure. So I'll stand so everyone can see me. Hello, my name's Seb. I'm a member of the European Parliament and also with Kathleen on the, we were on the EMIS committee and I sit on the Environment Committee. I'm really excited by these ideas, the idea that we can continue to decarbonise but also not deindustrialize, i.e. we reindustrialize in another sense. But I love that phrase, you say, take the glasses of the past off. The problem we've got is that we can't move forward unless we have widespread public support. And too many, I think, of our supporters have those glasses still on. Now, when we talk about the jobs that will be lost, it's an inevitable process, but how do we defend that before the jobs that you have talked about that will be created are indeed created? Yes, we can shorten that time frame, but if we have a critical point where that's public support isn't there, how can we drive that forward in that moment where we appear to be the ones who are not the ones listening?
Well, may I start?
Thank you.
Or you want to? Well, that's my profession, transitions. I haven't seen any transition in the past that arose from broad, massive support. A transition is controversial in itself because you need to say goodbye to the current activities and economy while the majority of the people is still depending on it. And you need to take a dive into the new economy without guarantees. So in the 19th century, we started in Antwerp and Rotterdam with small but deep support. There were some visionaries with visionary but controversial ideas. And the way you can deal with it is to start with small and deep support and build broader support in an evolutionary manner. If the politics or politicians are not right for it, then the pressure comes from society and business companies. But you need to work on it on a daily basis to broaden that support in an evolutionary manner. There's no way that you can convince 90, 80, 70% of the people for this. But when I started my career 30 years ago, I was claiming this for about 10 people, and 5 of them left the room within a couple of minutes and said, this man is crazy. It changed over time. So you see that the building up of the support is arising and unfolding, but it's still not the majority. I don't see it as a problem. You need to show the evidence by showing the projects that we are delivering them and we are creating jobs, and then more and more people will be convinced. Transitions always follow, let's say, different phases and different sequences. It always starts with front runners, then the peloton hooks on, and then the people who are not able or not willing to follow, let's say, and that usually takes decades. It's an autonomous process, but if we take a clever and smart approach, we can win 10 years, and that might be of crucial importance.
I wanted to say something to you, sir. You're a member of the European Parliament, isn't it? You can do a great job, but you did not, together with the European Commission and the Council of Ministers. Why did you accept in Europe to make it easier for Mercedes-Benz and Renault to continue build all technology cars with a lot of emissions? That's one reason for that. Politicians are afraid of losing jobs, and there is a huge lobby coming from the institutions. That is really maintaining former jobs and former... and I'm also a politician, so I understand how complex it is to explain to people that you are going to eradicate the type of industry without having a perspective. So you need first to have that perspective. We believe in Rotterdam to have that perspective already. I'm really embracing the announcement made by the new Dutch government to say coal-fired power plants will be eradicated in 2030. That is a powerful statement. European Parliament and European Commission can say that. We eradicate coal power plants in Europe within 10, 15 years. It doesn't matter how long it is, but set a date. That makes it easier for the innovators in the companies to say, we have no choice. It stays, and it stays simultaneously. But maintaining that old industry, supported by a powerful political statement from Brussels, that's not really helping. Yeah. So take it with you, please.
And the same holds for cities. Paris says gasoline cars are not welcome anymore in 2030. Well, that's a huge statement. Oslo says they are not even welcome in 2025. That's in 7 years from now. These are huge statements, and what you see all over the world is that the speed is determined by cities and regions rather than nations. The nations are lagging behind. Well, so may be it.
But on the other hand, the shipping industry was treated very softly in the Paris Agreement, which has... So we're talking about ports? Yeah, all right.
That is really a mistake. And it's not helping really the transition that we are needing. I mean, you should be real in what is possible. A lot of vessels can be easily transformed to use natural gas, liquid natural gas, which is really polluting very less, I think 70% less than, so that is a major contribution. And ports can help that in reducing the fees for eco-friendly vessels coming into the ports, which we do in Rotterdam. We give them a reduction of the fee if they have a clean engines. And there is technology available to use during the cross to Asia and to the Americas, to use wind turbines, and when you enter urban areas, to switch to solar energy. So there are really alternatives. And in the ports, in the second Maasvlakte, they have the possibility to switch off the engine because they can be connected to the power system in the port itself. So to me, the power agreement on this exception is really a mistake.
But there is good news, because there is a global agreement in the make for the shipping sector to decarbonize the shipping sector. That is now in the make. Like there will be in the make, let's say, a global agreement for the aircraft, because there were two major sectors excluded in the Paris Agreement, the ships and the aircrafts. We are changing that, slowly but unmistakably.
But that's a self-assessment, or is it coming from policy?
No, that's coming. They are negotiating about that now. That's happening these days.
Yeah, if I may, I think the front runners also need to communicate much more, because it's inherent to our nature. We try to avoid risk. So most ship owners are trying to avoid the risk of making the wrong decision when they go to liquefy natural gas, for instance. Bit by bit, we are seeing more examples, but they need to communicate more so that the followers actually continue investing in those good practices.
Yeah, right.
Okay, do we have another question here in the room? So if you could please introduce yourself, thank you.
Hi. Hello. Hello, my name is Jules. I'm an ordinary citizen, no member of parliament or anything.
Of course.
But I'm all for, clean vessels, ships running on gas, trucks, maybe running on electricity in the future, but shouldn't we be worried about the stuff they're carrying? For example, I mean, the stuff that goes in and out of our port. We're still exporting electronic waste, where there's a lot of dirty diesel, which is not even allowed on the European market. We're still shipping that to Africa. We're importing wood from, which is logged in a totally unsustainable way. We're importing fruit, which is farmed on farms where human rights are not respected. We all have I'm all for smart cities. We all have smartphones. You're also waving with an iPhone, which is probably made by children's hand. I mean, I also have an iPhone, which also contains coltan, which is mined in, mines in you know what I mean? So shouldn't we be worried and make regulation for what we're importing and exporting instead of focusing on, it's all very, I'm all for eco-friendly transport and everything, but shouldn't we be more worried about all the stuff we're importing and exporting?
Thank you.
I should say you're right, but it's part of the intervention of Professor Rothmans. That is the part of circular economy. The moment you recycle stuff, you don't need raw materials to the same degree as we're now using. And if you recycle in the same facilities, we have trash in Rotterdam, recycle it in Rotterdam, so there will be no export of it. We have trash in Africa, we recycle it in Africa. And Africa will be really, in my opinion, will be benefiting from this process because they don't have the old industry. We have to remove old and replace it by new. They can start freshly with new things. That's my opinion. When I see I'm born in Morocco, when I see what is going on in Morocco with solar energy and wind turbines, it's fascinating. They're now providing villages with electricity. They never had electricity. And in those villages, they would not need cables for communications because they're going mobile. But it's funny what is going on in that part of the continent. They need technology and they need knowledge, and that's, again, another theme from the intervention of Mr. Rothmans. That's about sharing. Sharing that knowledge with them will be a very fundamental thing to do. And in that process, the EU and the United Nations can help us a lot to do that.
Just to add to that, I fully agree with it. Two major developments. We have a concrete plan in Rotterdam to collect in the near future all the iPhones and iPads and what you have, to take out them the many useful resources and upcycle them and to deliver new sustainable products. That is really a concrete idea. Secondly, the real challenge is not so much energy, but resources. 5 years ago, there was a potential war between China and Japan about a tiny island that China wanted to conquer. Japan disagreed. Immediately, China stopped the export of lithium. Lithium is crucial for the production of the Toyota Prius. There's an uneven distribution of the scarce metals that we have. We have 17 of them. 90% is in the hands of China. So there might arise potential conflicts and wars because around these scarce metals, because if we really want to build up a circular and sustainable economy, we heavily need to use these scarce metals. Think about the huge production of windmills and solar panels. We need these scarce metals. So that should be high on the agenda of the European Union and the other continents. That's one of the really challenges that we have. Yeah.
Thank you very much. You want to add something?
Yeah. If I may. I also agree that maybe there should be more policy regarding some of the products that we export. For instance, we've been exporting scrap to China for many years. Now, China from the 1st of January is going to forbid that. But obviously, we are going to continue exporting scrap metal and scrap paper and scrap everything to other countries, which are not going to forbid it. So maybe fair taxing for certain products could also be a solution.
And the ecological footprint is very high.
For closing, I have a practical remark, if you mind. About sharing, and the whole story that Professor Rothmans told here the audience. I will be happy if someone is really willing to read that. Please raise your hand. This is my assistant for tonight. Please give your business card to him, and we'll be happy to send you via internet all the stuff we have. There's nothing we would like to hide for ourselves. We'll be happy to share that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. We're running out of time, and I would love to continue this discussion. We have a second debate this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank you, Jan Rothmans, Ahmed Aboutaleb, and Eva Perez Garcia. Thank you. Yeah, we should talk about consuming less than our capitalistic system here, but we're running out of time. Okay, I would like to introduce our second keynote speaker, and I think he's the perfect match with the topic that we're going to discuss, how to increase involvement of cities in the decision-making process in the EU. Professor Erik Korijn is an expert in urban planning, and he's not the kind of academic who lives and works in an ivory tower. Well, in the contrary, he's very proud to be called and to be an activist. He's founder of the research group Cosmopolis, vice chairman of the Brussels Studies Institute, and chairman of the think tank Aula Magna. And above all, he's a very good debater, so I'm looking forward to have him in the panel. But first of all, he will talk about the topic, Can Cities Save Europe? Please welcome Erik Korijn.
Thank you for inviting me, and sorry for being late, but that's traffic. Where is the... Here, is that it? No, where do I... Yeah. So I have 15 minutes, so 3 times 5 minutes for sharing 3 arguments with you. Kathleen was very insistent on that, 15 minutes. I asked 20, but anyway, it's my third keynote today, so probably it might work. So my first argument I want to share with you is reframing Europe as a metropolitan network and not as a system of nation states. That is the involvement. And I start with some general figures that everybody should take in his DNA. In one century, in the century of discussion, the industrial century, the humanity shifted from being rural and suburban to being urban. In the beginning of the 20th century, 10% of the world population lived in cities. Today, more than half, and in most developed continents, is 3/4 or more even. Cities have also grown bigger. In 1900, we only had 11 cities of 1 million. Today, we have nearly 600 cities of 1 million inhabitants. And in 2030, we will have 750, of which 150 million cities in China. So the process is a process of urbanization and metropolitanization. In Europe, the process is a bit slower because we have old cities, because we have cities since the Middle Ages, basically. And so we have a lot of smaller cities, but we have a very profound sense of urbanity. Moreover, as we have heard in the other talk, post-industrial economy is urban today. It is not suburban. It is not around the city, it is within the cities, and new industries, cultural industries, knowledge society needs the city to connect. And so we are living, and I absolutely like always to show this citation of Mike Davis in his book Planet of Slums, where he compares the transition we are in with the Neolithic and the Industrial Revolutions. In fact, we are in a transition. We will not go back to the former ways of organizing, and we don't know exactly where we are going to land. That's a bit the difference with the two other revolutions. We enter a kind of process that is radically new, but we don't know where it is going to stabilize. So if we look at Europe, it is this what we see. These are the images. Basically, you see the urbanization, the late medieval urbanization in the Low Countries, the urbanization in the Italian city-states, the relationship with the German cities in the Rhine. This is basically what you see today. This is the model of connecting metropolitan areas. And so, in fact, what is Europe? In reality, Europe is a center-periphery dynamics, where in less than 20% of the territory, you concentrate more than 60% of the population and 3/4 of the GDP. So that is the central area of the European dynamics. And if you see what parts of Europe are connected with the rest of the world system, then you see this blue banana, as it has been called since years already, reoccurring in Europe. So basically, Europe is functioning alongside these kind of spatial organization. A core area related with two peripheries, a Southern European and an Eastern European periphery, and a connected network of nodal points, which are the bigger cities. And how is all that told to our people in schools? That is Europe. Europe is still told as if it is a series of nation states. You see France with the nice French flag, and that's the country of French people. And then the most populated country, Germany, and that's the country of the Germans, except for the 3 million of Turks living there. They have their own territory, they have their own flag, etc. So what is not rendered in that, what is simplified, is this old 19th century ideal of having monocultural, monolinguistic, even monoreligious territories that do not exist anymore today. The reality is that. That is the new geography we have to tell people, and we have to organize. This is the kind of imaginary that we have to share with people. And the second thought I want to share is global systemic challenges are urban urgencies. I synthesize the three big systemic planetary challenges that will not be resolved without human agency. The first, of course, is our relationship with nature. The first global agenda is changing our relationship with nature. Of course, that has been developed as a perverse relation. In the real psychoanalytic definition of perversion, thinking that you are the boss, thinking that you are above the law, thinking that you can decide what the relation is, which is an exploitation. So it's not only labor that has been exploited, it's also nature. I'm not going to dwell on that because everybody seems to be informed. Our ecological footprint is too big. We have biodiversity declining very rapidly, and of course climate change is the most visible challenge today. We are above the capacity of the planet already. It is not a question of reducing growth, of changing the rhythms. It is changing the system, changing fundamentally our relationship. The second big, which in my view is as risky today, is the social inequality. There again, I hope, especially this group of people is following the figures about that. 70% of the world population has to survive on 3% of the wealth. Less than 10% of the world population have 80% of the wealth. 6 people or 7 people today own as much as half of humanity. And of course, it is a shocking element. It's an ethical question, but I'll leave the ethical question behind. What is the result of that? What is the result of that in a globalized market economy? You have too much private money. And you know that private money that wants to make money is not serving needs, is only needs with the purchasing power alongside to it. And so it is economically much more sensitive today to make Vuitton bags than to produce water provision in Africa, for instance. And so one of the big challenges there is, and I can even add to that, I think besides climate change, we are also reaching a tipping point in the financialization of the world. All that money is not invested productively, and so it is in fact invested in credit systems, and we are over-indebted. Everybody knows that. That means that all the people providing money are sure of one thing, that all these debts will never be paid back. Which means, of course, that every bank needs to control every government, or try to control every government, to dedicate every economic increase, every economic growth to paying back debts and not to invest it in social emancipation. And so what we have since a number of years, and I think we should be informed by that, is we have economic growth and social regression combined today together. And the third big agenda, of course, is living together on the basis of difference. And there again, I'm not going to dwell too long, but the world has become super diverse. And that is not only a question of migration, not only a question of new arrivals, that is also a question of individualization, of segmentation, fragmentation in our own populations, basically. And so there is no common identity, there is no common culture anymore. And so what is now interesting, I think, to, what I'm pleading for as a mental shift, is that all these planetary challenges are immediate challenges for cities. In cities, we are not, let's say, applying COP international agreements. In cities, we are solving problems of traffic jams, problems of bad quality of air, reorganizing, let's say, the context of living. In cities, we are not applying big projects of social inclusion. We are trying to do things in our derelict neighborhoods, at least to calm them down and to allow tourists to continue and visit our city centers. If there is not enough investment in Molenbeek, 500 meters further you have the Grand Place of Brussels, and these two are combined. So what I'm seeing is that cities try to pragmatically solve solutions, while governments are much more ideological, are much more, let's say, in a conflict model. And that means, in fact, that within cities you have the new program. Transition, sustainable transition that has been discussed, but also the social transition from social inequality to the city as a commons. And just one thought about that. Welfare states are declining, but welfare states where a social contract was based on an agreement to leave economy to private entrepreneurial activities, to tax these people, and then to redistribute money into social redistribution systems. Well, first of all, rich people are not paying their taxes anymore, so it seems to be more and more difficult to get these activities taxed, and we need too much money to just by ways of distributing money, allowing people to get in the market economy. And so what you see happening in cities, it's not a political decision, is that sharing, is that the commons, is that new types of redistribution amongst, and hopefully not only amongst religious communities, but within the neighborhood are researched. And so the commons, making the urban commons, I think, is a new form of socializing and should be part of the program, in fact, of people wanting to socialize. And the same goes for diversity. And there again, also synthesis. It is not possible anymore to socialize people through entering in a community. The Flemish laws say gemeenschapsvorming, samenlevingsopbouw via gemeenschapsvorming. We continue to think that you have to enter first a community before being allowed a member of society. Well, and that notion is part of the segregation, of the lack of inclusion. If in Brussels, with 2/3 of the population with no Belgo-Belgian references, and then 2 neighboring states having the authority of trying to offer their socializing mechanisms, and the 2 are in a minority, the Flemish community and the French-speaking community, and Saudi Arabia and Turkey are paying our mosques in Brussels, so a lot of foreign nation states basically in formation are trying to socialize a very diverse population. So basically socializations in cities is, in my view, post-national, is intercultural, interreligious. You cannot base a society on a community, and not even on the original community where the others have to be incorporated. And so the important part is, if you look at problem solving in cities, you see that they are dealing with planetary challenges, and in fact there is a program arriving that is that if you make livable cities, and our cities are not sustainable in a global market economy, that is absolutely clear. If you try to solve those problems, you have the program. But to do that, in general, cities should not be considered anymore as the local authorities of the national state. Cities should be, let's say, recognized as an other system You have the world system, you have the system of nation states, and you have the system of urban networks. And we have to politicize these urban networks. And amongst others, that is one of the initiatives I'm involved in, the Global Parliament of Mayors. Trying to make a global political instrument where mayors speak as global leaders. We are fed up with summit meetings where only presidents or ministers speak in the name of the planet. They have signed 20 years ago, the Kyoto agreements. Today we have more emissions than 20 years ago. So in fact, they are not serious in dealing with the planetary challenges. And so the last argument I want to share is, in my view, the crisis of the EU is the crisis of the member states and nationalism as an ideology. The EU is built on the idea of member states. Since the beginning, in fact, of the modern state and of democracy, the people have to be defined. And you have, on the one hand, you could say the old Republican French tradition with a very open view, trying to make a demos, and then the romantic German reaction, you could say in short, that is saying we cannot allow everybody. You are born in a city, born in a certain culture. You are part of an ethnos, and you have that debate. But the debate is always to make sovereignty within bounded territories, within a bounded nation state. There is no model of global or not even continental democracy. And so that leads to this idea that we are living in different societies. If I ask you to which society you belong, nobody will ask me I'm part of humanity. Everybody will mention a state. And that is why, after 4 generations, we are still speaking about the Moroccans of Molenbeek, and we don't have any other notion to define cultural differences or differences in ways of life. So, what is the difference? I think the nation state is built on the idea of a common history. It's the historic narrative that forms the nation state, that is delivering tradition, that is delivering an identity, and that is forming the format for representation. Political parties are still basically national political parties, and not global or continental political parties. And also art is basically within the nation state, and that is bounded in a territory. As I told you, if we in Brussels, we have to make social cohesion to build that on a common history, on looking for common roots, well, we are not succeeding before even we start doing that. 2/3 of the population has no Belgo-Belgian references in that city. So in a city, in fact, urban culture cannot build social cohesion on the basis of the past. But we have to find a common destiny, a common destination, a project. So social cohesion and mental cohesion in cities comes from the future and not from the past. And that is not a strong identity. That is hybrid, that is mixed, that is always built nearly every day. And that's why participation, why representative democracy is in such a crisis in the urban context. And that reinventing democracy at the urban level is participatory democracy, is co-production, is an interaction between civil society. And that is more in networks than in territories. I'm ending. The 3 basic references there is cities will have communities and will be multi-communitarian. There is one absolute necessity. You can form a group in a city if you don't have the arrogance of thinking that you have enough material in your group to make society. And in my view, that counts also for the domestic communities. And that means that society is about bridging, is about decentering from the communities, is about the other. And it's on that basis, I think, that new forms of state, in my view, local state, have to be thought. Okay, I'll just show, because the moderator says me not to speak anymore. No. Yes. So my point is, the world is in such a transition, and if we do not change our mental state, our mental map of that, we will not reinvent new political programs, new social programs. And in that sense, for me, the new project is urbanity as a post-national form of living together. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Mr. Corijn. And I invite you to take a seat on one of the stools. And of course, we want you to talk a lot more, but it will be with interaction with the people who are watching this debate through the web streaming. The hashtag is Europe Together, so it's very nice to have some remarks or your questions. They're very welcome. Just tweet them with hashtag Europe Together. And I would like to invite the other panel members on stage. Agnes Jongerius, she is a member of the European Parliament and the S&D Group Coordinator for Employment and Social Affairs and Vice Chair of the Committee on Employment and Social Affairs of the European Parliament. Wow, is that on your card?
No, thank goodness, not just my name. Huh? Yeah.
And Michaela Kauer, she is director of the Vienna House, a Brussels liaison office of the city of Vienna. We already heard her asking a question in the first debate, and we have just arrived from Ghent. Daniel Termons, the well-respected mayor of Ghent, of course, and president of the Eurocities Group. Welcome. Please give them a warm applause. I give you all a microphone, all right. Let's start with maybe a small remark on the keynote speech of Mr. Corijn.
Yeah, I was really thinking, okay, now I have to go on stage representing an organization based on nation states with my eyes to the past instead of to the future. So I was thinking, can I get out of this panel? Because it's in a way I feel what you say. I used to think one of my grandmothers, she was born in 1899, and I was always like thinking, oh, she had like lived through the First World War and then the crisis, and then the second. So I was really always very impressed by what kind of changes she has lived through in her life. But then thinking about the changes we have seen in our life, but also knowing there is a lot to come without knowing in which directions. So perhaps I think she, of course, doesn't live anymore. But perhaps she was more impressed with all the changes we are going through at this moment. Also leading to a lot of insecurity. Insecurity about, indeed, how do we form these inclusive cities? How do we create new job opportunities? But first of all, let's see if there is a future for our level of working. Or that we just should all go back home to the city we live in.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Termons, did you hear a few topics you want to dwell
Yeah,
on?
from what I heard from the keynote speech from Erik Corijn, that I know, of course, because we know each other already a long time. I have only one remark at this moment. He said that cities has to solve all the problems concerning mobility. Well, I think they have a little bit work here in Antwerp. It took me 3 hours and 15 minutes to drive 50 kilometers. 40 kilometers from Ghent to the border of Antwerp was only half an hour. All the rest of the time I had to try to enter the city. So I think there's some work for the new government in the city.
But maybe you can just...
No purpose, that didn't want to let you in.
Yeah, perhaps. That might be the reason. And you know something? That's
anyhow. Copy paste the new circulation plan from Ghent and send it.
Yeah. They certainly have to do something really. But let me tell you something about what Erik has said and what we are thinking. And if I say we, then I speak as president of Eurocities. And Michaela is also very active, and of course the mayor of Rotterdam, who is here also an very active member. Last week we were in Ljubljana together, where we have our annual general meeting. We are so convinced that the future of Europe will be made by the cities and not anymore by the member states. And I think that's also the message that Erik has given. Because, you know, we are not only the closest to the people, to the citizens, but we are also those who has to solve the problems. If you see every problem where Europe is confronted with and where the member states are confronted with, they don't find any solutions. Take the problems of the refugees. They don't find any European solution, but who has to find a solution? These are the cities. It is in the cities that these people arrive. It is in the cities that we have to work, that we have to find a job for them, that we have to find a house for them, that we have to build schools to send our children to school, and so on. Take indeed the mobility and so on. That's also something. The climate change, the fight against climate change. Who can really make the difference? These are the cities, not the member states. They're always fighting, discussing, and don't find any solution. But we find solutions in the cities. So we are so convinced that indeed, if we want to go, that change of mind is really necessarily, that's where you ended your speech, is really necessarily. And we have asked so many times to the European Commission, talk directly with us, take us serious, and let us try to find solutions for the crisis we are in at this moment in Europe. And I think we will have I can tell a lot of these things, of course, but I'm going to keep it here for now. But if we have to find a solution for the crisis in Europe, first of all, I want to say, don't let us laugh with things like Brexit and said, oh, it's only one country and it's only for the occasion and it's only one party and it was only one moment. I think we have to take it very serious. We have to take this kind of signal very serious, because otherwise there will be no Europe anymore. If you see what's happening in Hungary, if you see what's happening now in Poland and so on, I think there's a
So what's the leverage that the city has to contradict this and to take this serious? What leverage do you have?
What I see, Michaela also, and other members of Eurocities, is that we can discuss about it. With the Polish cities we discussed last week on a very good basis. Take the crisis in Catalonia. I had a discussion with the colleagues of Barcelona, and we saw the colleagues of Madrid agreed. So we can find solutions, democratic solutions, and not in the way they are handling now the member states and how they are handling the will of the people there in Catalonia. So we find always solutions for problems where Europe and member states doesn't have solutions for. And I gave you a lot of examples.
But let's go first to Michaela. What's your point of view from, as a representative from the city of Vienna?
Yeah, well, asking me what the role of the member state is as a representative of a city is a little bit tricky. Or dangerous maybe even, because I'm very much in favor of what you have been saying, Professor Corain. The post-national democracy is, in fact, it's the vision we must have to develop Europe further. And I think that it has to do, of course, with how cities should have a say in Europe. And we are very experimental at the moment with a new instrument which was given to us by the Council, so by the member states, after a lot of intervention by the cities and their networks, which is the EU Urban Agenda and the EU Urban Partnerships on different issues, where, amongst others, we, of course, also tackle all the things around sustainability, environment, air quality, mobility, so all the issues that are really important to cities. And maybe there we already have a little construction problem in the whole system of this, because the European Union, or especially the European Commission, I must say, is organized in a very sectoral way. And what we in cities do is always thinking in a very integrated way. We are not thinking like, this is my water management and this is my forestry department, and because they're all linked to each other. And this has to be sustainable and not smart, which would be stupid to think. So I'm really in favor of thinking in an integrated way, and I think this is the value added by cities to the European level. And in that sense, I would say, just the last remark, when you talked about new democracy in that context, and that has to come from cities, I am a big fan of representative democracy, even though we see that there is a crisis, especially when it's coming to European elections. That's of course lamentable, but we have to see that there is sometimes 20 to 30% of the people in our cities that are not allowed to vote for what is going on in their cities on local level. I'm not talking about national level, but just about this. And I think there also we have an issue, and this may be one of the sources of the problem, just to be short.
30% that are not allowed to vote, why is that?
Because they don't have the citizenship, and this is the problem we have with the nation state and with all the issues around it. And if you're living, paying taxes, working, raising your children, taking part in whatever extent, you should have also the right to decide what's going on in your local community, and we do not have that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I go straight to the people who are present here this evening. Anyone who wants to ask a question to one of the members in the panel, just raise your hand. There's several people with a microphone. I'm just watching, I'm keeping an eye on Twitter, but a lot of remarks are given, but not really questions, so, which is a pity, because we're still waiting for some input from the people who are watching to the live streaming of this conversation, of this debate. Anyone who wants to ask a question? Okay. We've got one. It's a start.
If nobody goes out there. My name is Lode Wijns. I'm former Dean of ERIC at the Brussels University and former Vice Rector. I have a question to this panel and the former panel with respect to sustainability and the policy in cities. Mayor Termont mentioned mobility, but I don't worry. I think there's a number of problems we will solve. But politically, sociologically, I see one major problem, and that is housing. It was mentioned smart housing, but not so long ago we had a very humble problem in our country. There was new legislation for changing elevators, and that created huge social problems in many families and in cities. Now I wonder if you have to go towards smart housing, that will create a terrible political, sociological problem. I wonder how a mayor and other people think about that, how they will get through that problem.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Who wants to react? Michaela?
I think I'm able to give a question, an answer or remark, because I happen to be the coordinator of the Urban Partnership on Affordable Housing. And this is one of these experimental, projects we're undertaking now to work together with cities, member states, and EU institutions and other stakeholders to look at what can be done on European level to create better conditions, especially for cities, to make housing affordable again. We know that in Europe we have an affordability crisis in housing, and it's not only about the technical issues about you impose a new law and you have to do this or that. This is sometimes very local, but it's in fact the issue we have at the moment is that we have 82 million Europeans, EU citizens, who cannot afford housing anymore. And that has to do a lot also with an issue that is linked to the conference today, because it's part of it is energy poverty. People cannot afford, they may afford to pay for the rent, but then in the end they cannot afford to heat more than one room. This is happening, this is real. This is the life of citizens in Europe. So I think affordability is a very smart way to create better housing conditions all over Europe, and that opens a little bit the way to discuss about the framework conditions we need as cities. because we are looking for better legislation, better funding, and better knowledge in these partnerships, these urban partnerships. And what we see is that in most of the cases, we have good ideas on city level, together with other stakeholders, and that it will be the member states who are reluctant to implement our proposals, which we have to deliver after 3 years of working together. And I think our proposals will be on legislation, on funding, and on knowledge. And I very much hope also that the European Parliament, and I look at Agnes because she's a friend of our partnership, that you will help us to push a little both the Commission and the member states in this exercise. This is really, really vital.
I saw that the mayor of Rotterdam wants to give a reaction as well. Here you are.
For the very practical thing, I'm the mayor of Rotterdam. I'm also leading the national program for renewing Rotterdam South, which is quite a big effort. That means 35,000 houses ever built for the man in blue overalls working in the port, 50 square meters, small houses, very poor equipment, very cold, a lot of humidity, that provide really a big trouble for the health of citizens. Not really appropriate housing for the citizens. So we have to deal with this big environment. One of the things we're going to do is sometimes we will say this street will be eradicated to provide more space, more oxygen, green areas. Sometimes we will combine small houses to one house. Sometimes we just demolish part of it and rebuild new ones to create new living environments. All these houses will be connected to heating coming from the port. It's fascinating. We will have more heat in the area to heat not only Rotterdam, but also The Hague and Leiden. This is a huge part of our transition program that we will work on it, together with national government and also with the local governments and also with national governments. The first time that I got an applause in my city council, there was once and never again, that was when I stated that in my city, I would not accept people sleeping on the streets. That is, to me, belong any level of human dignity. So it's really important to work on this issue. It's not an issue of whether we keep cheap houses. That's, for some political parties, a very important option, to keep old houses because they are affordable for groups of people. That's not my statement. My statement is, if these houses are not good, get rid of them, build new ones, because everyone has a right to live in a decent housing. Then the issue becomes not an issue of housing, then the issue becomes an issue of finances. Who's going to pay for that? Then we'll move to the stage of distribution of the income of the nation concerning housing as a scarce product of a society. So the first phase for Rotterdam South, and we succeeded in convincing the national government to change the taxation law to the benefit of Rotterdam South. Can you imagine what it means? A national law changed just for one part of the nation. And Rotterdam South is also mentioned in the new government program as a priority. So we'll start with 750 million euros already available for the new phase for the next 5 years. And my expectations, we will need an additional 1.5 billion euros for the coming 15 years. So it's really a political choice, not more, not less.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abu Taleb. Yes, and I think you want to give or ask a question as well. I come back to you.
I only want to add, I agree, of course, with my colleague, but I only want to add that all cities in Europe are confronted with the problem of housing, all the cities, and especially in the west of Europe. And that has also something to see with the refugees who are arrived in the city. Also, we as a small city of only 260,000 inhabitants, we have 25 to 30,000 refugees that we have to find a house for. So that means that and the member states has to do something, or the government in our country is very complicated. We have 7 governments. I'm not going to explain it to the other friends who are here, but everybody, every Belgian know how is our country is very complicated. But we need that money, and we need also, and that's very important, I think, for this debate, that is that the cohesion policy of Europe after 2020 has to be continued. There is a big discussion now. We hear everything. And from Eurocities, we are following it from very close. So we hear everything. We hear that there will be less money, that the money will only given to the east of Europe, to the poor cities. But don't forget that we in the West are confronted with a lot of problems. And that's housing, and that's schooling, and that's jobs, finding jobs for the people. So we need also support. We cannot do it alone as cities.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm coming back to you because I see, Agnes, you wanted to
I do see what you mean, because I think I'm a fan of this urban agenda, because it's in a way also a way to circumvent all this silo thinking, which is at, of course, national level there, but even in a bigger scale on the European level. So you have all these separate silos of thinking, and that we have been able to push for this urban agenda and the Pact of Amsterdam that really has helped to push some items through. So I'm in favor of that. I'm in favor of people taking responsibility at the local level and say, this is not decent. Huh? And every now and then it's really helpful that people just make this statement and then fuel into action. At the other hand, we should also at the European level push for funding for our welfare states, because indeed some issues are at the local level, but our big companies are all operating at this international level, and they are all trying to, and sometimes through my country, through the Netherlands, to circumvent paying any taxes at all. So if we want to have the funding for these projects in Ghent, in Rotterdam, in Vienna, we also should push from our political family for let's have some decency in paying the taxes, because otherwise we don't have the funding for all these necessary projects at the local level.
Yes, I don't think it's only a question of management. It's also a question of changing principles. Mm-hmm. Changing principles. I think that the question objectively will not be solved if we want individual housing, individual property, like mobility problems will not be solved if we sustain individual cars, etc. And that's what we are doing. The welfare state is paying the lifestyle of the middle class and has reduced collective and sharing in society. And so we have to shift, in my view, also what is the orientation. And don't expect that from Europe in general, because Europe wants to privatize. Europe wants the market to succeed. It is not a welfare project anymore. We have also to be realistic in that. And so if cities have a project in housing, let's try to make it, let's say, maybe smaller individual, but also a habitat of collective infrastructures, of neighborhood services, of collective, of community land trust, all these new models that exist, where it is not one single family in one private house, but where you integrate, where you socialize housing, and where housing is not just a roof, but is also, let's say, a way of living in a society. And so transversal, integral projects, I think that should be the transition towards the future. The city as a commons in a divided world. Mm-hmm. And so it's not only a question of finance, it is a question of sharing also, and of not investing everything in private housing, but also in rents, in social housing. And so we have these models. They were the basis of socialist movement in the 19th century. And now we think that the only way of socializing is giving people individual money to buy their share in the market. That is not worked. Stalinism it was bankrupt. I think neoliberalism is also bankrupt now, and we have to think differently.
But please allow me that I also think that we should be able to redirect the direction Europe is taking, because perhaps you think I'm naive, but if I'm not able to dream about another direction of Europe, I really don't see any necessity of getting out of bed in the morning, because I think this is where we should talk about. It's about how do we help one another, how do we indeed talk about moral issues, about issues how to organize society. But I think we should not give up.
But it's not a utopia. It's not a utopia, it's achievable. But you have to
I hope so. I hope so. And so every now and then I do wonder, why do I get out of bed? Because perhaps the choices are which are made are the wrong ones. But I think if we allow ourselves to think it's only utopia, then we give up.
May I do a proposal maybe? Why don't we take over the Committee of Regions and take it out of the hands of subnationalists? Because that was the original idea, in fact, of having regions which are territorial unities, and take it over as urban metropolitan networks and make that the institution of the urban agenda, and then have a tension with the Council of Ministers, with other institutions, and maybe with the help of the Parliament we can have other alliances. So let's make a European institution that is really developing that agenda, and then we see what the relationship of forces is between the institutions.
You get support for this idea.
I would not agree totally with it. I mean, I'm a fan of the Committee of the Regions, of course, but my mayor is a member, I must say, so I have to. But I think that we have an issue because, I mean, we are talking about cities, but I think it would be worth also to look at because cities are growing, yeah? Most of the big cities in Europe are growing at the moment. This means a lot of investment is needed for all the infrastructure. And maybe we can talk about that as well, because I'm a fan of boring investment instruments and boring financial instruments. I'm a fan of 3 to 4% maybe to have a profit, but not more. And I think all the boring old-style investments are the good ones, because we need long-term investments in cities. And I think we should look exactly at who is willing to share this with us. This is one point. But the other point is to see that why is it that cities are growing? It's not because of migration from outside Europe or from outside our countries. It's very often migration from the countryside. And in fact, really, the countryside has a problem. And if I can make a wish, I would see what did happen with this common agricultural policy in this last how many years? It is now an issue of the European Union that they are paying for it. Millions and millions and millions and billions and billions and billions of money going to the countryside. And obviously, this is not the thing that people want there, because they're leaving the countryside. And I think we have an issue of reevaluating, especially also this part of the cohesion policy, because the more people are coming to our cities, I'm fine with people coming to Vienna. It's good, yeah. It's a challenge for all of us, but it's good. It's okay. But it means that we have a problem on the countryside and with life quality and quality jobs in the countryside. And this is an issue we should not forget. We have to discuss the both together.
Mm-hmm. This has been a big issue in the elections in France. I'm going to you, sir. Besides stimulating the people here to take the train instead of the car, what is your question for our panel members?
My name is Ludo van Ooyen. I'm from the Netherlands, but I live in Brussels. I strongly believe in what you're advocating, the problem-solving capacity of cities. Strongly believe in it. I don't think cities can solve all the problems, not necessarily. There are enough problems that are very fundamental that can be really addressed at the city level. My question to you is the following. There is this Eurocities group, which is a network of cities. How do you see to it that you share your knowledge? How do you organize your learning? I strongly believe in networks, but especially when they are strong networks, and that they learn from each other. How do you prioritize the challenges that you face? And how do you learn, not only as a mayor, but how do you see to it that the city governance, the city government is learning from the new solutions that are found?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for your question. It gives me the opportunity to tell 2-3 words about Eurocities. Eurocities is a group of more than 140 big cities in Europe. We represent 140 million inhabitants. We have our secretary is in Brussels also. We have there 45 people who are working for Eurocities. You know that we have a couple of goals, of aims. That's first of all to put pressure on the European community and the European Commission to give more attention to the cities and to work closer with the cities. Secondly, what you're asking, we are working very hard on learning from each other. The peer-to-peer is very important for us. We have 6 or 7 forums where about all kinds of things, where cities coming together, about culture. Last week there was one in Ghent, and there were 80 people for culture together. If we see last week where we were together, there was 101 city represented, and we were there with 580 representatives. So, and there is a lot of contacts between the city. They learn a lot from each other, yes. That's one of the very important things, I think. We have learned so much as Ghent from Eurocities. We are already members from the 80s. And we have learned so much, because also from my colleague, I'm going to give you one example, because he is here. He told me, I said to him, what are you doing with the local problems, the social pressure on the neighborhoods? And he said, I'm going to explain you something, buurtbestuurd. And that's neighborhood, in short, something like that, when I have to translate it in. And he explained me how he was working with the citizens, working with his services, working with the police service. The fact that's something we have in common. I also go often to the people, to their houses, only knocking on the door and said, I'm your mayor, can I do something for you? And these are of these things. So what I learned from him, we have now similar, but slightly other way of organization. But that's something I learned from him, and we have so much success with buurtbestuur in our city. And so there are daily examples where cities learn from each other. Yeah, that's very important in Eurocities. And I want to add only one word on the COR, the Committee of the Regions. In the Committee of the Regions are indeed all representatives of governments, of provinces, and so on. Eh? There are no cities in the Committee of the Regions. Yeah? They get a lot of money from Europe, and I'm wondering sometimes what they are doing with that money. Yeah? That I'm wondering. And next week, the president now from the COR is also a social democrat. It's Karl-Heinz Lambrechts, who is now the president. He's a good friend of mine. Next week, I have an appointment with him, because I want to discuss a closer cooperation between Eurocities and the Committee of the Regions. But I agree what you said. These people are all, the Flemish people, for instance, who are in the Committee of the Regions, are nominated by the Flemish government. That does not, the Flemish government is no real, it is a region, yeah. I may not speak too loud here in Antwerp, or the roof gonna fall on my head, I think, if I say.
Just one thing, I'm not advocating that the city will solve all the problems, but I'm advocating, and one little sentence of you, the city is not the local level anymore. It's the global level. And I can give you many examples where the cities are more global than the nation states. Trump took out of the COP agreement, that's local. And 2,200 cities in America said after a few weeks, we stay in. So the cities are global, are much more close to the global problems than nation states. And so one of the things of the mental shifts is we don't have to ask to our national governments permission to have certain types of politics. And so exchange of knowledge is one thing, but what we miss is a political voice of the metropolitan network as such, not of all the cities separately, but of the connected cities that are economically, that's the spatial structure of our continental economy. It is not international, it's basically intercity. And I think what would be good, in fact, is to have a political expression of that kind of organization.
Can I do some product placement?
Yeah, take your microphone.
I want to do some product placement at this point, because this is really inviting. It was said quite often that city people are very pragmatic, and I think we are, and so before we wait until we get a new constitution on European level that allows us to have post-national democracy and all this, we are already doing all these things together. And for example, we have been now developing jointly with city networks, regional networks, the Committee of the Regions, and others, a cohesion alliance, which is really, really important at this moment. So this is a concrete example of a joint platform creating joint positions, and it's asking, of course, for a strong cohesion policy, it was mentioned before, beyond 2020. So I think this is something we did sign as organizations, as city networks, as region networks, as EU institutions like the core, but it is also something you can sign because it's downstairs in near the entrance. So each and everyone can sign it individually, and I'm sorry to misuse a little bit this now, but it's really important that we have this in the future again. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions? We've got time for one last question, and it's going to be yours. What's your name?
Good evening. Is it fine? My name is Alexis Le Couture. I'm a job seeker, and here as a simple citizen. It's an additional question that addresses both this panel and the previous one. If this is to be the dramatic change in our socioeconomic model, in our socioeconomic patterns that Professor Hartemann mentioned and described, a change in which obviously cities and local authorities in the broader meaning will have to play their part. How can we advocate such a change in regions towards regions which are economically less developed than ourselves? I mentioned that because what strikes me in the selection of the panelists is that we have Austria, we have the Netherlands, we have Belgium, we have Spain, we have no one from Bulgaria or from Romania, which are typically member states which aren't exactly at the same level of economic development. How can we convince them? What attitude, what discourse should we take to advocate that this change is actually economically profitable to them?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Who wants to?
Well, I wanted to say two things about that. First of all, I think there is a big problem in Europe. They divide their money and they give money to the Eastern European countries to help the poor people, and especially, for instance, the Roma, because I know this problem very well about the Roma people. We have a lot of them in Ghent, they squat houses and so on, we have a lot of problems. So what did we saw, so I'm going to end my first thought. First of all, there is a problem, because Europe gives money to those countries, and those governments use this money for other things. So, for instance, in Bulgaria, Slovakia, they get money, and what are they doing? They're building new motorways, they're building bridges, and so on. And when I say then to one of the members of the government there, but that's for housing, that's for schools, to building schools and so on. That's for a social policy. And they say, the Roma use also the motorways and the bridges. They use it also. So that is the answer that I receive. So I have done a proposal to the European Commission, but of course they said, well, it's very interesting, but I never heard anything about it later on. I said, leave a part of this money, or take this money back and put it in one tail and divide it to the cities who are doing really something for the people who are moving from the east to the west. But they say, it is interesting, but they don't dare to do this, of course, due to the fact that there is a protest of the governments of the east of Europe. Certainly, the second, I want to give you an example. We saw that from one village in Bulgaria, a lot of people were coming. First 10 families, then we had 20 families, and our services said they're going to come with more. It's a village of about 700-800 people, and they all will come to Ghent. Because we find a house for them, we try to find a job for them, we take their children in school and so on. And they say they're going to come all if you don't do something. I said, okay, let's invest money to go to that village And we installed their activities for the people local in Bulgaria in that village. And our people has stayed there for 2 months, other people for 3 months, and together with the local organizations, we could do something for them, and it has stopped. So it's a small example, but these are things that we really can do, and even from cities on. So I think that the member states and Europe has to do more what's concerning that the people have their job, that the people have their education, what they need, that they have anything that they need at a local place where they live.
Mm-hmm.
One additional remark, because this is about redistribution and help and solidarity, but I think one of the other mental shifts we have been, let's say, brainwashed by neoliberal market economic theories, thinking that the surplus value production in cities depends on investment that comes from outside the cities. And we have to be attractive to market operators. Now, if you look to it, and my colleagues, social geographers and economic geographers have calculated that in most cities between 40 and 60% is grounded economy. Is production and reproduction of daily life in your city. And so what we have to do is to make that qualitatively better, to invest in that kind of economic activities. And we will have to do that if we want to make the sustainable shift, because then we have to shorten, to have more circular economy, to shorten production and distribution change, to make it as, let's say, as an ecosystem, a local ecosystem. And if we invest in that, we will have more localization. I don't want to cut from the global economy, but parts of the economic policy and of surplus production and of producing of wealth has to be thought as a local development model and not just a global development model.
Okay,
yes, that would be my small remark. Last week, with this Together event, we were in Gothenburg because there, that was on the eve of the Gothenburg summit, the social summit. And I think not the topic of this debate especially, but if we are talking about Eastern European countries, we should also think about our economic and social policies, which, quite simply said, people there deserve a pay rise, so they don't need to find their economic future only. And of course, migration is allowed in Europe. I'm okay with that, but if we really want to have a more sustainable future of Europe, the divergency at this moment between the different economies, between the different parts of Europe, is really something we should worry about. Not going to solve it tonight anymore, not saying that we should not be active at this city level, but this is an issue which is also on our table.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. We're running out of time, so we have to round up. We had some remarks on Facebook. Patrick Cotty, he mentioned, don't exclude rural areas, we are bigger than cities. Michaela, I think that was a remark on what you said. And Willem Visser, well, he mentioned a topic that we were discussing in the first panel about CO2 emission reduction, and he was, he said we're not going to make it with wind, sun, and water power, so we will definitely need nuclear power as well. So it's another topic, and we don't have the time to discuss this, so our apologies. All right, I would like to thank my panel members, Professor Corijn, Agnes Jongerius, Michaela Kouwe, and Daniel Termont. Thank you. And I would like to invite Kathleen van Bremt back on stage, because we have to introduce two young and very motivated ambassadors.
That's right. That's right. I want to introduce Christina Müller from Austria and Carlos Pilos from Spain on the stage. And you are our ambassadors. Yes, you can applaud them, absolutely. Because we are organizing this event for not just for Antwerp, not just for Belgium, but for the whole of Europe. And we do that also especially for the young upcoming people, because you are the future. And I just want to mention to you that we're like 100 people here tonight, but at this time, at this moment, more than 4,000 people are watching. It's not to make you nervous. 4,000 people are watching us live on different stages. And that is something amazing for me, the first time that I can announce that, but we are the #1 Twitter trend in Belgium at the moment. Yeah. Okay, please just address in your own way a little bit who you are, why you're here, and what your engagement is.
Thank you very much. Warm welcome from my side as well. It was a very interesting night. I got so much new ideas, which motivates me, inspire me, and I'm also thankful for a lot of things which have been said very clearly. I agree with almost everything, but at least. I was asked to introduce myself to you tonight. I would like to do something else. Time is limited, we know, so I would like to do something more important, talk about an initiative I'm part of. It's a small initiative. We started to work 6 months ago, and we work on a small project. It's a social and progressive Europe. It's a city-based project initiative with party members and also just interested friends of our social democratic family. But wherever we go, we get mostly one question. It doesn't matter if it's discussion, workshop, whatever. People came up to us and asked us, you're a city-based initiative, why and what are you doing in Vienna? Shouldn't you be in Brussels? With all the other institutions of the EU, or somewhere higher. And I think this question, this very simple question, sums up one big problem, which also motivates me to work and which also brought me here tonight. It sums up that the people in Europe do not really feel part of this political progress we talked about tonight. They think it's out of their hands. They do not understand it, they don't feel that they have an action or a say. So my answer, or the answer of a lot of my congress of the initiative, is just one simple thing. It's not new, and I just think we have forgotten, but we made some important steps tonight to remember together. Neither our goals nor our challenges are national. They are not restricted by borders. Only if we all together remember this, think internationally, stop thinking in these boxes where you can put in everything, then we can find the right solutions and challenge right-wing populism, conservative family conceptions, or to make it short, the capitalist explanation of nature and people. So to come back to the cities, to my initiative, the place where this progress, today we heard a very strong word, we heard revolution, gonna happen, in my opinion, is the city. The city is where the people are, and I disagree with the colleague on Twitter. 2/3 of the people in Europe live in cities. In 2020, it's estimated to be 80%. So our future lies in the city, and there are also our people. It's a progressive majority, and well, thank you very much that I could be part of this tonight, and I'm really looking forward to some more discussions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you for your wonderful speech, and you're most probably next political star in Austria. I'm not doubting about that. Carlos.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much to the group of Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament, and especially to you, Mrs. Van Brem, for hosting us here in Antwerp. Thank you as well to all the participants for the very interesting remarks, also to you, Christina. My name is Carlos, and to be honest, I was a bit surprised when I knew that I was selected as Europe Together ambassador, because I wrote a blog on climate adaptation. more and more people are on board for wind farms, solar panels, electric vehicles. But let's be honest, who cares about climate adaptation? The thing is, maybe, maybe Mrs. Van Bremt and I, but in my case, for example, I come from Spain, I lived in the Netherlands, now I live in Belgium, 3 of the most climate vulnerable countries in Europe. Poor cities in these countries, as we have seen, are the first to be affected by climate risk. So what I would like to do here is like a call for action for all of us. Over the past 30 years, economic losses due to climate change have almost doubled in Europe. 2/3 of all those losses were not covered by insurance. So there were people that lost everything they had due to climate change, again, in Europe. This affects people that have less resources than most. For example, those who can't access information to know how vulnerable they are, or those who can't pay for affordable insurance, for example. Progressive voices have to care about this. Climate risk is a multiplier for inequality. So building Europe together means leaving no one behind. No one. So what I would like to do here is for all of us, cities and citizens, to raise our voices, to go out there, spread the word, let everyone know how important it is for them to join us in making this Europe a reality. A Europe that cares and protects its most vulnerable ones, also against climate change. A progressive Europe, a better Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Thank you so much. I think you're going to, yeah, you go or I will? Okay, so voila. I just want to make one announcement after your wonderful speech about adaptation. Announcement, it's not an announcement, but something that people from Antwerp know, and even people from Ghent know. Ah, there you are. We will have next year we'll have local elections in Belgium. It's extremely important, especially in our cities. And here in the city of Ghent, we made an alliance, a progressive alliance. What did I say? Oh, did I say Ghent? Sorry. Of course, I mean Antwerp. In the city of Antwerp, we made a progressive alliance between us, the Social Democrats and the Greens, and progressive citizens to go for the next elections. And you may guess what the name is of that alliance. Any idea? In Dutch, it's called Samen, and that means together. And I invite you now to go to have a nice glass of wine or something else and something to eat. And I would like to thank the speakers.
The declaration, you want to mention the declaration, which is
sorry. Yes, I always forget. I'm not a good presentator, of course. I always forget these things. There's also the Together declaration. That is a declaration that is made and amended and been spoken also by you, the ambassadors. And I just would like you to embrace that declaration by acclamation, if you would be well.
It's on the S&D website.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Something else I forgot?
No, we're going to invite all the speakers on stage.
And thank very much to all of our speakers. You have been wonderful. Thank you very much.
And we have the anthem.